Yeah. And so there's nothing controversial there?
Nothing whatsoever.
All right. Oh, my goodness me, Kim, why don't you just go ahead with it?
I will.
And I will certainly have a look at it. I got another mines department appointment. I'm looking for gold.
Good. Oh, that's awesome. Well, keep me in the loop, please.
We'll do.
Okay.
So go ahead, Kim, if you like it, if you've censored it, go ahead.
Okay, thanks ever so much, Ernie.
You study accountancy and you meet all sorts of people. In fact, people confide in an accountant more than they would in their doctor. If you have an entrepreneurial flair and willingness to do something outside accountancy, there are many great opportunities, I've got to say that. I'm a chartered accountant, obviously, and I've migrated to Australia about 40 years ago. I was born in Namibia to German parents. They were cattle graziers. They had a sheep/cattle station in Namibia, and I was shooting, I was hunting, I was horse riding, I was herding cattle, and it was, you were on a buzz, you were floating, perfect environment. The whole environment was so fantastic that you actually got a buzz. You enjoyed it. You played sport, you played rugby. It was a fantastic life. I first of all went to university, Rhodes University, and then I did my chartered accountancy at Wits University in Johannesburg, and then finally decided to migrate. I didn't choose Adelaide, first of all, but I had jet lag. So when I landed in Sydney, which I've got to say is the most beautiful city in the world, I was jet lagged, so I just kept moving. And finally, when I got to Adelaide, everything was beautiful, so I stopped and stayed. I got a job straight away with Ernst & Young, a couple of steps here and there, and I then ended up with my own practice. I was more comfortable being a chartered accountant, creating my own practice, expanding my own practice. And this is where I met these Polish geologists from Lee Creek. And I did the books for several of them. And, they were very influential in the mining development of South Australia. As Edison said, there's 99% hard work, and Eddie Corris was a hard worker, was an extremely hard worker, and he left no stone unturned. I met him when he was a young geologist, and the pure dynamic and motivation of this guy swept me away, and we worked together. I did the behind the scenes accounting work, mining applications, jobs like that, and he was the geologist. But his pure genius. I went to Queensland, and the reason why we went to Queensland years before was that a friend of a friend of a friend who Eddie knew, a massive, large cattle station, they were drilling for water, and they hit this black stuff. And they were saying, what is this? And then they approached Eddie, who they knew was now a consultant for BHP and consulting all over the place. And Eddie went up there and said, Ernie, here's an opportunity here, let's go for it. And it was early stage investment. We were out there in our swags, taking samples, looking at things. But let's face facts. The hard work was Eddie, the genius was Eddie. I slipstreamed along with him because I recognized the abilities that he had. Where we initially were, the Queensland coal map, which now no longer gets printed, said there's coal here, okay? But then in the middle of that was like a big egg where it said no coal, because that area was full of basalt. Coal does not exist in marketable form where there's basalt, and so therefore that whole area by the geologists was marked as no coal. Now Eddie, this is another chapter of the story, said you can't tell if it's basalt unless you actually walk up the hill and look. And this particular hill we walked up, and Eddie took the stuff and said, Blind Freddy can see this is not basalt, it's sandstone. The map said no coal. Eddie knew the coal was there. Governments were not making money out of extracting high fees and high exploration license fees, particularly in Queensland. And that was initiated by Bjelke Petersen. He made sure that the big mining companies either used the exploration licenses or they would lose it. So things became available to smaller operators. This was a window of opportunity that came and went, because now a small operator has no chance of doing this sort of thing. This was a window of opportunity. The license application fees were small so that small people could access it, but the time frame was short. If you didn't use it, you would lose it. We managed to scrape enough money together to do some drill work. The reality was that Eddie knew Peter Mitchell extremely well. Peter gave us a drill at very low costs, and the first drill hole, this beautiful black stuff came up, absolutely unbelievable. Eddie was there in his swag with the driller, and and the next morning before the sun rose, Peter Mitchell was there. He obviously got a phone call at night from his driller hand, and probably said, "Boss, you better come and have a look at this." And they knew what they were looking at. Peter Mitchell was one of the greatest guys I have ever met. He said to Eddie, "Look, I was about to put $1 million into my super fund, but I think I'll buy shares in your company instead, as long as you use my company for the drilling work." And that was the first partnership of real big money, was Peter Mitchell. And from then, admittedly, they took the driller to the other side of our tenement. They found nothing. So they rushed back this side, because the number of holes you drill that show up black is what you need. You just don't need one hole. And so they drilled up to 18 holes showing the best perfect coal. Then there was a lot of long, hard work of developing this exploration license. And when it was proven, a company called Excel heard about Millenium Coal. Eddie was the managing director of Millenium. The valuation at the peak of coal prices, that Millenium Coal would have been valued just short of $1 billion. Initially, we were equal partners, but you got to recognize the input. So my shareholdings whittled down to about maybe a third, a quarter of what his shareholdings were, because other people had to come in, like Peter Mitchell, for example, like Excel Coal, and Eddie was the managing director of Millenium. I recognise his input, everybody else recognised his input, so towards the end he had about 4 times as many shares as I did. Initially we were 50-50, there's no question about it. Then when Peabody came in, Eddie Koros sold out, I stayed in. And it was several years later that I sold out. And my personal life has not changed at all. I still drove my same car. It hasn't changed one bit. It has relieved a lot of pressure, because when you are borrowing to leverage a business, there's always that stress. When you don't owe anything, there is a major stress that you don't have to deal with. That is one change. But as far as I'm concerned, I've got a vineyard, but I still walk around the vineyard and pick the fruit and the berries from there. I've got a big house, but the only reason why I bought the house was I had to park my money somewhere. Yes, I've got a few developments around, but me personally, it hasn't changed much, except I do a lot more traveling and go visiting the family back in Africa and those things. I can only say I sold out very handsomely, and I'm very grateful to Eddie for introducing me to this game. That's what gives me a buzz. Just a few opportunities thinking outside the square, and you've got to remember, you invest in people, because there are many great ideas out there, but it's the people that make ideas happen, and that's probably where I end the story.